A while back I did a video on how a PhD gets funded, and after I did it I realised there was one important aspect that I missed, which is the amount of pay and how that compares to other jobs. So let's say you get a grant either from Research Council or Centre for Doctoral Training, which in the UK is probably one of the major ways if you're doing a PhD in a scientific subject. So the number's generally around £15,000 a year. This year it's £15,009 for a doctoral stipend for 2019-20 start by my research. It's more if you live in London, but of course if you live in London everything's more expensive. So how does that stack up? Well, I'll start by linking to a site which has some figures for graduate salaries. I know this isn't a properly rigorous scientific analysis, but it'll do. They don't seem too far out or too out of date. So we get physics and astronomy about 26 grand, slightly more for various engineering degrees. Let's say that for now. So at the start we're saying basically about 11 grand more. Now the thing is, if this figure for graduate salaries is biased, it's probably biased towards being slightly higher than it actually is. This is probably one of the basic things in statistics, but the people who earn lower amounts are more likely to have disappeared from those figures than the people who go on to do great things. But I'm going to trust that they've got a reasonable grasp of statistics and that that's reasonable. With that in mind, we start off with the idea that PhD funding would give you about 11 grand less than someone who does a graduate job. However, there's a couple of advantages of being on a PhD, which is basically not paying tax, not paying national insurance, and because you count as a student, not paying council tax, which knocks a large chunk off this, because the graduate would include people who pay that. At the moment, tax, I think, is generally given as 20% off anything over a particular personal allowance, which, as of recently, is a bit less than 12 grand. The next tax bracket up is around 50 grand, so we'll ignore that for a moment. You have a bit over 10 grand more than that 12 grand personal allowance if you're doing a graduate job then, and you're taking 20% off of that, which knocks off somewhere between £2,000 and £3,000. Throw national insurance and council tax in, again, we're going completely into the world of guesswork because this varies person to person depending on, for example, where you live, but we're going to call that another 3 grand total over the year. I'm trying to be conservative for my estimates, but that would put us on around 21 grand money in the bank for a graduate job. That gives you then a more interesting final comparison. PhD getting you around £15,000 with a graduate job somewhere around £21,000. I'll say that that's probably accurate within a couple of grand. This basically tells you where you are if you want to go for a PhD after your job. The sacrifice in income that you're making is largely going to be around about 5 or 6 grand a year. Is it worth it? Well, financially, generally people seem to say that PhD students earn more later in their lives from having a PhD, but then again, money earned earlier in your life has more chance to do work for you. So that's a difficult one to go into. But there's the basics of it. There's the basics of the money you earn from a PhD. Next time I'll talk about how that money generally could get spent and roughly how much it works out for someone living on it.